of what the content
I believe
pyramid's
that if
all
you have a
about.
podcast like you do right now, or you do a daily V like I do, that if you create a macro piece of content, 12 hours of filming, a singular keynote, a 1 hour podcast, that if you start with that hero piece of content, you can then make 7, 23, 84, like in that example in the deck, pieces of content that then go live contextual. And let me say this very carefully. Right. The video that I play on Facebook versus the video I play on LinkedIn is going to maybe have different copy, may start at a different point. I've been screaming at my team, I don't scream as they'll tell you. I've been passionately communicating through text that thumbnails and titles matter way more than this team realizes. So let's get our shit together. Let's win.
Because it's what stops the scroll.
Of course, context.
Yeah.
You have to understand the psychology. You on LinkedIn is different than you on Instagram.
The moment of truth to me really came from an observation in business and across different companies, seeing that a lot of people just would like to have this phenomenon where you kind of push a button, get money, where you do a thing and then the customer immediately comes and buys from you. But, that's just not the case. And that's why engagement and content and building relationships really matters, because it's a sequence of events that all lead up to those key moments where you get money as a business, which is why we're all in business. I think the first lesson for me is there's no such thing as the consumer or the customer. Customer base or consumer base is really this constellation of people with different needs and values and behaviors, or more specifically, it's just a constellation of people. And I get the question all the time, do customers like this or do customers like that? And then I, of course, answer it back and say, well, customers do this, customers don't like this. But really, we're not talking about customers. What we're talking about is a average or a modal behavior that we're able to pick up on and say, this is a prevalent behavior. But the fact of the matter is there's still a lot of people, and typically it might even be the majority of people within your customer base that don't follow this modal behavior.
People are drawn to honesty. People are drawn to, you actually like taking your guard down, because so many people have a guard up. And so your ability to kind of like put out portions of yourself and stories about yourself that other people might be too nervous to talk about or too embarrassed to talk about has worked wonders for me, and my ability to connect with people and get them to trust me. Like even this morning, like with these little kids, K through 8, like the first thing I got up there with was, how many of you were born in a hospital? And they all raised their hand. Okay, well I gotta put my hand down because I was born on a mattress in Texas. Also, my mom took the placenta and buried it in the backyard and grew a tree out of it, and that tree's still there, and it's called the Ryan tree. Right? So that kind of breaks the ice for a room of kids. First of all, they're like, what's a placenta? Two, they're like, okay, this is gonna be a different kind of talk.
The starting point needs to actually be about do. Why do we ever have a presentation? Because we want the recipient to do something afterwards. And that's the thing that generates some focus. And the way that we make that do happen is with creating a story around the process, something that's memorable, that has a narrative flow, that ensures that the person receives the message, understands the message, can recall the message later and can use it. One of my tips about any visual aid is it should make sense without numbers. Your client may insist it has numbers on it, but it should actually work without the numbers. Numbers are hard work. We're not well suited to numbers bigger than about 3.
And so I think as an industry, we're having to evolve, particularly our quantitative data reporting, from something that was largely static and driven by data tables to focusing on more interactive ways of reporting and really challenging ourselves to move from just reporting numbers to actually reporting a story that thematically ties to the brand and to the research finding. Probably love this story where I was just getting ready to do a big data presentation. I remember launching the first kind of couple pages of PowerPoint charts, and the head of marketing kind of looked around and said, "Oh, wake me up when the data is over," which is just the worst thing that you could hear as a researcher. But it was a really big wake-up call to me that presenting data in the usual ways that might appeal to people that are a little more analytically driven or really love data tables, as a lot of researchers do, that just doesn't work for a whole lot of audiences. And when we present data in ways that are really mind-numbing or not interactive, then we lose that audience, and it lessens the value of research in an organization overall.
The communicator, the presenter, the writer, whatever it might be, the communicator is saying, hey, here's all the stuff, right? Here's all the information. I am giving it to you. And what the audience wants is they don't want a giver or a lister of information. What they desperately want from speakers, I believe, is for speakers to be interpreters of that information. And to become an interpreter, I think that the all-important, most critical question, and you should ask yourself this a million times as you are developing a talk, and answer it while you're giving the talk, and that's the question, so what? I think that when you look at findings, when you look at the reports you're trying to convey, when you look at the visuals that you're trying to design, ask yourself, so what? The way that I like to think about slides is think about having your slide do something for you that your words cannot. So if you have a message you're trying to convey, then you're thinking about, okay, what would be the visual way to do that?
So the moment that I remove the story from a magic trick, it really is just a puzzle. It's just like this, like a trivia problem, right? The difference between a math problem and a magic trick is a magic trick has a story, and a math problem is just you figuring out the mechanics of what the answer is. And so the moment I remove a story from the trick, it's really not that compelling. And the same is true of selling things, of generating content, of writing speeches. So you have to invite people into a story. And so the greatest way to shift someone's action is to change their attitude. The greatest way to shift someone's attitude is to put them in a culture or an atmosphere where their attitude automatically changes, and then they take the action out of that.
If you can paint the story of what's at stake, why it's urgent, where the conflict is, and how you can solve it, people will listen. So I'm a big believer, part of the reason why meetings go on so long, why a lot of content doesn't work, why people fall back on jargon, in my experience of doing, storytelling for 22, 23 years, it's because people don't know their story. The reason people fall back on jargon and bullet points is they don't know their story. So challenge yourself to get out of bullet points and really know what's the emotional stake of why you're meeting. If you're meeting to solve a problem, then tell the people in that meeting, look, if we don't solve this problem, here's what's going to happen. We have a chance to fix this, and here's why we need to. And if you paint that urgency for them and how they can be part of the solution, then people feel empowered to make a difference. Now you're not just given a bullet point and a bunch of buzzwords, you're making them feel critical to solving that challenge. Comedy is all about the truth. The best storytelling is all about the truth. Comedy is a form of storytelling that focuses on the truth. Because if I say to you, gosh, marriage is hard, you're like, okay, marriage is an institute, blah, 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 all these buzzwords. You go, okay, whatever. But if I say to you, gosh, I've been married 20 years and, I never thought about divorce in that amount of time, but murder, hell yes. Exactly. You can't help but laugh because that's the truth. I can wax poetic about all these things of institutional marriage, or I can just say that one little truth bomb, and you go, oh, hell yes, she knows. She's been married 20 years. Comedy is about getting to the human heart of the truth in a way that makes people laugh and go, yeah, there's a truth bomb there. And so that's the kind of connecting in your story that I think that is accessible to everybody.
One of the things I did learn is you really have to take into account the cultural differences. You have to take into account what is important for the individual. So it takes a lot of networking at a personal level to say, what's important to this person? How can I make it important to him or her to deliver on time as opposed to just tell them that they have to do it. So it's a lot more persuasion than direction. Much of the other projects I've worked on, I've been able to just give direction. So for me, it was a learning experience to understand how to more influence and persuade as opposed to direct in terms of that. And in the end, not only did both the space agencies deliver excellent instruments, but a side benefit is I got to know very well several people in those organizations at a personal level. It always comes down to personalities. Yeah. For better or for worse, it's always a matter of dealing properly with different people and treating everybody, as an equal. Because really, when we're trying to build up a spacecraft to do something that's never been done before, everybody has to be in line with what the goals are 100%. Because if they aren't, it's very difficult to do the impossible. And what we're trying to do is close to the impossible in many ways. And so we need everybody rowing in the same direction all the time.
If you look at the history of the advertising industry, to some extent, it's always been about us talking to people and saying, this is the story that we want to tell as any kind of brand, whether that's a B2B brand or a B2C brand. More and more what we're seeing and where hypertelling comes from is it's no longer what the message is that we're putting out there, but it's what people do with that message once it's out in the world. Do they share it? Do they riff on it? Do they create with it in some other way that we haven't even thought of? And that's really kind of our job as anybody that's doing storytelling of any kind, whether that's advertising or beyond, is to think about, okay, that's great. We've got this story that we want to tell, but you can't just own that story as yourself. You've got to figure out how to relinquish control and let other people do something with that story when it's out there. So that's why I really think it's no longer about storytelling. It really is about this hypertelling idea.
I think as a company and as a brand, your first instinct is to sort of own everything and control everything. But the way that media works today, you need to let much of it go, right? And you need to sort of build it together with your audience. You need to co-collaborate, as it were. You need to be part. You can't leave telling your story to media. You have to tell your own story and create your own content, create your own media, and co-collaborate with the people who follow and love you and buy your products.
I just did this NASA project, and the last minute, now it's NASA. It's a poster to celebrate Voyager 2. Voyager 1 already left the whatever sphere, and now Voyager 2 is going to go, and they want to raise awareness, because when they raise awareness, they get more funding. Yeah. Another thing just left, the something sphere. These are two pieces that mankind, the heliosphere, mankind released from our clutches of our, and those things are going out in the world, and I got to make a poster to commemorate that. Check it out. Yeah. We get it approved, and then we put it up on the website where everything's awesome, and we're doing laps, and we're great, and all this kind of sashes. I had the thing pointed the wrong way. A little bit of a typo. It was pointing out into the universe. It actually has to point back, because that's what emits the signal back to Earth.
After all the approvals, nobody caught that?
So the idea is this. When you get up there and you say, the scientists looked at it and they were like, actually, it looks like it's exploring the other way. Maybe we should just go with that, because if you're to get the public to, no, the way it looks this way. I have it looking like this. Okay. So when you get to say, I'm working for NASA, I got to do something for you guys. Heard of NASA? I got to realize one of my dreams, and then check it out. Bit of a typo towards the end of it, and you bring them right back down, and you realize what a pile of that I am, and then you kind of go, but I got to work for NASA, and you bring them back to halfway.